As a country, we're approaching this tsunami of transfer with all the sophistication of a kid's game of pin the tail on a donkey. If I'm writing my will, it's my chance to sort of set up my hopes and aspirations for those that follow me. Well, yes, it'll cost you money, but it'll cost you about 1/10 of what it's going to cost you if you don't start. We Kiwis are great at putting it off. Money talks, wealth whispers. Let's design it. Let's not wait for things to happen. Let's not wait for disasters to arise. Let's actually take the bull by the horns, create a plan and start working on it.
Over the next 25 years, New Zealand will undergo the largest intergenerational shift of assets in its history. Dubbed the Great Wealth Transfer, this shift is expected to see between $1 trillion and $1.6 trillion in assets, mostly property, pass from baby boomers to their children and their grandchildren. So today, we've got an expert in this field, a lawyer from GC Law, Andrew Clements. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Luke. Thank you. And it's a fascinating thing that we're facing, really.
Yeah.
And it's not my quote, someone said recently that they're very worried because as a country we're approaching this tsunami of transfer with all the sophistication of a kid's game of pin the tail on a donkey.
Far out.
It's a bit scary.
Well, hopefully we can better educate people a little bit today. But this has
That's
been your passion, I believe, for some time, right? Like you live and breathe the space.
Yes. Yeah, no, very passionate about that. And really, I suppose, if you want to know why, it's because I've come from a family where I had a fantastic grandfather. He had great values, incredible businessman, but through lack of planning, it was lost.
Wow.
And I've vowed and declared I don't want to see other clients go through that drama. I'm fortunate I had great family, great values, good upbringing, and it gives you a chance to sort of rediscover the course and journey in life, but not everybody has that. And so my big passion is working with founders, working with families to make a different course, to make a different legacy, really set a different path.
Well, I think a lot of us who live and breathe social media would have at some stage come across some sort of high-level stat about how wealth never gets past the third generation or something like that, right? Talk to us about that.
Yeah. It's the old shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3Gen, isn't it? And the fascinating thing is when you look into this, Luke, that's a reality in every culture in every country in the world. And yet when we were doing some work in this back as far as 2012 or 2011 actually, we discovered that there are a lot of advisors working with families in the transfer from Gen 11 to Gen 12. And so you're going, well, what the hang are they doing that we're not? Because when you think about it, that means that over the last 300 odd years, that family's had every kind of economic cycle you could think of. They've been, my goodness, they've had every type of government, from tyrants to sovereigns to every form of government we can think of, right? They've endured it. And yet those families have grown, they've stayed together and they've grown, and their net wealth on a per capita basis has improved generation on generation. But they haven't lost their identity of who they are.
Interesting.
So it is, and it just sort of really challenged us to start making some inquiries and go, why? What are they doing that we haven't been doing? And sort of that's what drove a lot of the interest.
And that sort of high-level stat around it not going through 3 generations, what's typically the causation of that, or the crux of it for us everyday people?
Yep, for us everyday people, it's lack of design. Okay. And it's lack of having the right tools. You think about anything, if someone gives you the right tools, you can approach something and deal with it intentionally. And that's the great thing about what you're doing here, is giving people tools, giving us common, ordinary Kiwis tools we can use to help shift our course and to actually take hold of our potential in our future and do things intentionally by design.
So some people listening to this, they're probably set to inherit money, maybe businesses, maybe properties, etc. What's the sort of advice, like generalised as such, that you're speaking to people about day in, day out, that they're probably just not thinking about?
Yep, great. And really the key advice is take hold of things and do it by design. Engage in the communication. One of the overarching principles that you can never get away from this is the saying, philosophy breeds methodology. And so for that, it means, take time to understand who your family is, what your values are, understand your hopes and aspirations, and then think clear, with those in mind and with your values in mind, and I'm not just talking family values, but performance values, Let's start saying, let's design it. Let's not wait for things to happen. Let's not wait for disasters to arise. Let's actually take the bull by the horns, create a plan, and start working on it.
Is part of it that we're scared to talk about death and that the inevitable and things like that, so then people
100%.
just kind of go, because I think I saw a stat, and you would know about the number of people who don't have a will, and I believe September is Wills Month in New
It is
Zealand.
indeed, yep. If you don't have a will, please get a will.
Yeah. Why is it important for people to have a will?
It's really important because it gives you clear instructions. If I'm writing my will, it's my chance to sort of set up my hopes and aspirations for those that follow me. And it's my ability to give some clarity and some direction. And one of the big messes that a lot of us have to deal with is if a parent or a loved one doesn't leave a will, is you got to then step into the gap. Someone has to step into the gap and get what we call letters of administration. And then you've got a whole statutory regime you've got to adhere to. And that 9 times out of 10 does not give what the family necessarily needs or what's best for them. So the ability to will is our ability to sit down and think, what's going to achieve the best results for my kids or my spouse or my partner, my loved ones that I'm leaving behind.
So from what I've learnt about it, your will, you're basically dictating what you want to happen. If you
Correct.
die
Yep.
without a will, that's called...
Testate.
Yep. There we go. So
Yep.
we learned some legal
Technical
terms today.
term, that's right.
And basically you're then dictated by the state or by
Correct.
the rules. Like,
Yes.
okay, then here's what's going to happen.
Correct.
And can you contest that if you don't like it?
You can, but without a will, it's a bit difficult because you're just following a prescribed statutory formula.
Yeah.
And that can lead to disasters in some cases. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but you're then gambling rather than designing.
Too many of us signed up to a KiwiSaver plan without much thought. And signing up is great, but if you've never got advice before, you could be missing out. Your KiwiSaver account could become one of your biggest assets over your lifetime. That's why getting expert advice early and ensuring you're in the right fund is so worthwhile. Generate have a team of KiwiSaver advisors available to help. Head to generatekiwisaver.co.nz/change to book a no obligation meeting. They can even come to you. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Well, let's do the exciting piece then. And I'm not saying law's not exciting, but much like accounting. So if all of this wealth transfers, how do you, what's your overall take on it? How do you see it playing out? What do you think people are going to do? How does the country change? You must have this thought experiment all the time, given that you live and breathe it. What do you see happening?
My concern is it can be a disaster, it can create a big mess. You would have, through your accounting practice, witnessed on a number of occasions the impact of someone winning lotto. And in a lotto winner scenario, 90-odd% of them end up financially worse off than before they won because they don't have the right mindset, they don't have the right tools, and they don't have the right network of people around them to enable them and guide them to achieve their potential. And that's the concern I have here, is that we could end up with things being quite disastrous for their country. A sector from the Waikato that's really dear to our heart is the farming sector. And my concern is if we don't do this right, we end up with corporatisation and we end up with the loss of families, of that sector being a family-run sector. And it's similar in manufacturing, it's similar in a lot of tech design. Tech actually in farming have very similar challenges. So that's very much my concern.
Yeah.
What I'd like to see instead is that we can actually take this as a massive opportunity and attend to it by design rather than default.
So what am I hearing, that there's a risk that maybe the family business gets sold off to the giant corporation, and then they've got the capital, the balance sheets that they can lean on, the money, and they can go and buy them.
Yep.
And I come along and go, sweet, here's my chance to cash out and clear my mortgage. And
That's right.
yeah, okay.
And then your kids are going, yeah, thanks for nothing, Dad.
Because I think I read recently, and there's a study every year, but a couple of years ago it was that 50% of business owners in New Zealand are over the age of 50, and then last time I read it was basically 2/3.
Correct.
Now, whatever that is, we're over-indexing compared to the Asia-Pacific region.
Yeah.
And a lot of business owners, that's their retirement plan for a lot of older business owners, right?
Correct.
My business is my
Yep.
retirement plan.
Yep.
What's the... And that's kind of what you're seeing. You're predicting that then they're just going to sell those on the open market, and if the family aren't interested, then it'll just get swallowed up into the big guys.
Big guys. And I think it's important to actually have a plan because, as you say, for some of us small business owners, that is our retirement strategy. And in the absence of good plans around a succession plan, that spells disaster. But with a succession plan, it doesn't. And one thing that challenged my initial early thinking in this was a report that came out from UBS Bank in Zurich. It came out last year. And they interviewed the top wealthiest 200 families. And not really many people in New Zealand can relate or identify with these families. But I always find that there's good learnings that you can glean from these people because they didn't start with that wealth, right? They got there. And so it's a case of going, right, what lessons did they learn so that I can translate that into what us Kiwis can deal with and glean. And the interesting stat there is that less than 47% of the next generation are involved in the same sector, let alone the same business as their parents. And yet they're building wealth incrementally on that. And so that's what's forced me to relook some of my initial design approach and that to come back and saying, right, maybe it's not just about retaining the family business. So that does help if it's done correctly. And don't get me wrong, that'll do it faster than anything else. But if the founder's in a position where they need to in order to fund their retirement, then it's not all lost. You can actually design things. And what it's translating to is actually having clarity of who we are as a family, how we roll, and then preparing the next generation. And that draws in an interesting comment, Luke, is that in the next generation there's 3 types of kids. Right, most people, literature will talk to 2 types. They'll talk to the entitled, which we don't want, right? Because they're the ones that are going, it's my right, give it to me, I'm going to spend it. And they're usually the ones that when they receive the inheritance, go and buy a fast car and wrap it around a pole. There's a generalisation, but you know, you can probably visualise, and people listening to us can probably visualise people like this. What they really want is the rising generation, and that's the kids who've been empowered and brought up in a way where they've got to take their own initiative. They don't have to do what dad was doing or mum was doing, but so long as they're doing what they're good at to the best of their abilities, that's the rising generation. They're the ones actually going to lift up, engage in this sort of planning and going, great, how do we grow? How do we advance this? And they're going to be the ones that get quite passionate about it. The third one is not often talked about, and they're also a disaster, and tragically they're quite common in New Zealand, and that's the disempowered generation. And those are the kids that are being kept completely in the dark. And mum and dad won't talk to them about what's going to happen next. None of your business, stay out of it. They're not entitled because they're not running around with their hands out going, I want, it's my right. But it's just the disempowered, and that's tragic because they're the ones who have potential to be rising, potential to get out and make things happen, but they've been so cut out of it that they're not able to do that. So we don't want either the entitled or the ignored. We want to focus on developing that rising generation.
Can I guess what the split would be?
Go for it.
So the entitled would be 40%.
Yep.
The rising would be 10%, and the disempowered would be 50%.
I think you're pretty on the mark there. Yep.
Yeah. Wow, that's so Kiwi, eh? Like,
It is.
no, we're not. You're not talking about that. It's none of your business, whatnot.
Correct.
But your job must have gotten harder, I would have thought, over the years, because you've now got, like, you'd have 3 kids,
Yes.
say.
Yep.
One's doing science.
Yep.
The other's doing finance, and
Yep.
the other is living in who knows where, Europe, Aussie, whatever, never returned.
Yeah.
And they're all going to have different families of their own, different values, different lifestyles,
Yep.
and therefore different demands on what happens when mum and dad pass.
Exactly. And in your example, which is very, very common, different tax jurisdictions.
Of course. How did I miss the tax bit?
You're being kind. So you're correct, and that's where it's so important to have engagement. And what we've found is it helps people if instead of seeing things as just one big group that we've got to deal with, is to see things in 3 sorts of phases. You know, family, business, and stewardship. And you can fit most areas of a person's life into it. You know, think of a small business owner. Business, they've got their business. Family, well, we've got that. That's self-evident. And there'll be some assets, and that's where your stewardship is. And I can give you an example if that helps. We had one family who had a reasonable business, it's sort of about a 60-40 debt equity ratio, but they were doing okay. And they wanted their son to take over the business. And the son was in the UK at the time. And in conversing with the son, there was no way he had wanted that. There was just zero interest, right? So what we did is we said to them, right, Mum and Dad, I want you to take a really bold move. I want you to trust the process. And so what we did is we stepped back from trying to deal with the immediate challenge of business succession and focused instead on how we got family engagement. And what that unpacked was that the son was brilliant with engineering. And the reason he was in the UK was he's avoiding the family business.
Mm.
The daughter, 2 daughters, one of them was local, was actually exceptionally gifted in that area. The other daughter just had no sense of direction and future. And that's because she was in that bordering into that disempowered mode, not by Mum and Dad's intention, but just by way of how she rolled.
Yeah.
And so what we did by taking and have a step back is we had conversations and we created a family advisory board. Now the beauty there is Mum and Dad were still in control, but the family advisory board gave the family permission and a safe space to talk about the issues and to work through them. And over a 2-year period, they just caught up quarterly on Teams. And I said to the mum, how's it all going? She said, well, it's really weird. The UK guy's back. He's now working in a down country. The youngest daughter's actually got a sense of direction. She's actually really excited. And it just drew the whole family together.
Awesome.
Transitioned the kids from being, avoided the entitlement stage. They were fortunate none of their kids were wired that way, but it got them all out of the danger zone into that rising generation space. And then we were able to focus on designing a transition. And we separated out the core assets, had those in the central thing, which just stayed in New Zealand. And then we created a separate business arrangement, which the daughter ended up taking over. And then we created a strategy called family banking. And that was going, right, in your example, the person who might be sitting in Europe, how do you benefit? Because you're not involved in the day-to-day running of the family business. But there are ways by which you can create a fund, a family fund that advances money to help them, And a classic case in a New Zealand situation might be that granddad puts some money aside and half of that's invested correctly through a professional fund manager, and the other half helps the grandkids buy their first home. Mm. And it's done on a way where the fund co-owns the first home. And so when the home is eventually sold and there's, Lord willing, there's capital gain, that portion of capital gain goes back into the fund. So the fund's not diminishing, but the fund's helping the grandkids get into a property market that they couldn't otherwise afford to get into. Mm. And so you're doing a helping hand. You're empowering them to actually do their own thing. They may not be involved in the business, they might be involved in something else. But
this space I think would be so hard for us to understand because I guess we haven't had a wealth transfer this large, right? We haven't really had to think about a lot of these things. I guess everyone would be familiar with the bank of mum and dad. So,
yes.
But I just want to on that I want to touch on how do we? So if that's 50% the disempowered, how do we instigate some of these conversations with mum and dad, or say, hey, maybe we need to start thinking about succession? Like who normally drives that convo?
That's the challenges. There's been not many people have, and so we're trying to drive it with our clients. A lot of the accounting advisors are as well, and some of the financial advisors are the ones trying to drive this. And it's really important that the professions do, because what we can create is we can create a safe space. I'll give you a classic example with the expanding reach of the relationship property rules. A lot of business owners are concerned around, how do I transition things to my kids without, diluting or exposing family resource to risk outside the family. And the beauty on having that sort of family advisory council safe space is it doesn't matter who's involved in there, because that area doesn't have ownership.
Yeah, I see.
You see? So you don't split a family, because you can say, in the example I gave you, they brought involved the sons and son-in-laws, and they brought the daughter-in-law involved. and had everybody sitting around the table, and everybody had voice. They were able to focus on this as a family rather than being hung up on, what legal risks are we creating. They could focus instead of who we are as a family, get our clarity around who we are as a family, what do we value, how are we going to operate together as a family, and then step back and look at the finance. And I think that's the other danger is, as lawyers in particular, accountants are better at it, but as lawyers we tend to focus straight on what are the dollars, what are the assets, instead of realising that families comprise social capital, intellectual capital, spiritual capital, that's your values, human capital, as well as financial capital. But we only focus on one of those five. It's a famous guy, J. Hughes, that came up with that, the 5 capitals in the family. And as you've picked up on that, 4 of those 5 values are qualitative. Only one of them is quantitative, and yet we ignore this whole thing. So it's a challenge.
You must have been down some serious rabbit holes in your career.
Oh, yeah.
I dare say a lot of Kiwis, if you said, what do you value? And that's something they just don't even really think about. So to be doing it at a family level, and then having different generations and then trying to facilitate that convo, I'd imagine there's a fair bit of pushback from time to time.
There's some very interesting conversations, and that's why it's best to actually do it in that space where everybody understands this is not about how mum and dad are dividing up their assets. This is about us all engaging and agreeing on how we're going to roll as a family. Yeah. And that empowers mum and dad to actually sit back and say, right, we've had the grandkids feedback, we've had the kids' feedback, we've got our feedback. Now we can actually sit down with our accounting and legal team and our financial advisors, and we've got a bit of we know what the chessboard is. So now we can start designing, but we're designing what's going to work for us, not what's prepackaged and done in China or America or wherever. We can learn from the principles, but we've got clarity on who we are and how we roll.
Okay, so keeping it practical for those people who may have parents who they know have a number of assets and whatnot, but they don't want to go knock on the door one Sunday when they're having the family dinner and say, righto, I reckon we should get an advisory board, and the parents are going to go, whoa, what is going on here? Are there any sort of intermediary steps to start facilitating some of those combos?
100%, and it's just having the conversation with mum and dad, going, hey, mum and dad, you've worked hard. You're working hard, and we just want to make sure that we honour the legacy that you're building up, because you're going to pass to us, we're going to receive a heritage of not just monetary resource, but family resource. You guys have actually done really well, and we want to honour that. What is it we need to be aware of or be mindful of? Yeah. So that when the appropriate time comes, and we're not saying it's now, but by any stretch, but when the time comes, we're prepared. We can honour what you've done.
And sometimes it's that, this property needs to stay in the family because it's got sentimental value. Yeah. That's where we holidayed, where grandma took us, and that was the backbone of building this family, things like that.
Yep, 100%. I had one like that where we ended up in a mediation situation, and one of those property, that exact situation came out, and it was turnkey in actually getting the family to an agreement, is saying, look, this particular property had such significance, we don't want to sell it.
Because that's, for a lot of baby boomers, that's how they've built wealth, right?
Correct.
We've got scared by the 1987 crash from what I've read about.
That's right.
No, never again for a lot of them. But we've got here, baby boomers make up 23% of the population. That may be changing slightly, but own more than 50% of the country's wealth, which to me just makes sense because they've lived longer, and then of course you're going to then have a higher level of that wealth. Much of the wealth is tied up in residential property, with 1.6 million homes owned by Kiwis over 50. What is going to happen to all of these homes? I'll give you my thesis and see what you think. But I see the younger generation coming through, having more access to share platforms, learning about investing through KiwiSaver providers like Generate, etc., and maybe getting to the inheritance piece and going, I don't want a rental. I don't want 2 or 3 of them. Mum and dad, I know you love living in the big homestead, but I don't want to do the maintenance on that because I value convenience, and life has just changed so much.
Yes.
Would you, A, agree, and then are you having some of those convos, or B, like, well, how do you see it playing out?
Definitely. I think you've summed it up well. And add to that also the developing of the digital economy. you can see that there's going to be a very different approach to it. But I think if you peel it back, going, Mum and Dad, why did you do that? And their focus was we wanted a balance between risk and certainty. And you start peeling it back, there's a lot of the value statements come out that you're going, well, actually, it's not a lot different as to what we're doing. It's just that our world has changed, and now we need to focus it on different things, different classes and different categories. And I think that's sort of helpful for families to understand that just because the next generation is going, look, I'm not that fussed on having the great big homestead, is not saying I don't value similar values to you, Mum and Dad. It's just that my world is different to the environment that you grew up in. And so how do I take the principles of going security, et cetera, and apply them in my world? It's going to see a different picture. And I think it's helpful to Mum and Dad to understand that that next generation aren't actually writing off what they've done. They're just saying we need to take the principles and the philosophy behind your thinking and apply it to our reality.
Yeah, nice. That's deep.
It's cool, eh?
Yeah. You're so right. It is so much different to just, there's a pot of capital. How do we deploy it?
Correct. Yeah. It's understanding that. And that's kind of the neat thing is when you start getting into this, you see, I have experiences like I had a family that were just not talking to each other. And we went through this sort of process. And sitting there and watching Dad and the son who hadn't spoken for 15 years because of a difference, exactly what you've just mentioned, that scenario, realising that when it peeled back to values and thinking, they were thinking the same thing. And they were both sitting there with, these are hard units, with tears running down their face going, man, oh life, we should have had this conversation earlier.
Wow.
It was really quite powerful for me.
And they just had a difference of opinion of where to deploy money effectively in their belief of what the superior asset is or something, no
exactly.
doubt. Yeah.
And when they realised that they were both thinking from the same perspective, the dad was going, well, I can hear now where you're coming from. And the son was going, well, actually, I can hear where you're coming from too. We don't have to do it overnight. Let's roadmap it. And that's great because then you're going away from reactive and confrontational to design and intentional.
I think it'd be stupid if I don't ask you this one, given that we've got access to you today. You must have and still do deal with a lot of high net worth individuals in the country, very wealthy people.
Yep.
You talk about what we can learn from different countries and stuff, but those people you deal with, like what, I'd imagine you've done some thinking of, okay, what makes them tick? Who makes them who they are? What are some things that they're thinking about that the ordinary Kiwi that's on the come up, etc., may not be thinking about yet or that we can learn from them?
Yep, they're brilliant. And I'll frame it in the context of, you're correct, we act for a number of high net worth and very fortunate to do so. And I'll talk it from the position of the ultra high net worth. Okay. Because that's aspiration, is we want every Kiwi to have the opportunity to get to.
Yep. Ultra high net worth, is that like hundreds of millions?
Yes.
Okay,
yep.
Cool.
Yep. So they are sitting there and going, right, our most treasured resource is not money because we've got enough of that, plenty of it, right? Yeah. Our most treasured resource is family and people we can trust.
I wrote down time, so I got that wrong. Yeah.
and time is the third one.
Okay.
So family, people we can trust, and time. And I think it's in that order too for a lot of them. And so a lot of those families, when they're talking about how do we approach succession, they're looking at values. And so, there's a lot in the commercial world around ESG. I can tell you that there's even more focus on that in the private wealth space, where families are going, we have a stewards of X, whatever it is here, say we're talking $200 million, just for pull a number out there. We're a steward of this $200 million resource. That means that we've got to be caretakers of that. But we don't do this in isolation. We're part of a community. How are we engaging with our community? How are we making our community a better place? And so they're saying, right, well, let's look at philanthropic values. Let's look at, constructive values. And it sounds fluffy and so forth, but I can tell you from a commercial and a strategic point of view, it's not. It's a really hard-to-tack business. Because what they're in essence saying is we can be wealthy and complete tools and it'll just self-implode because our family will destroy itself. Therefore, we're back to that 3 generation. Gen 1, great. Gen 2, average. Gen 3's lost it. So we've got to make sure that at those points of transition, we've got real clarity on values, and it's got to be looking beyond ourselves. We've got to have meaning other than just money, because meaning on it's money without meaning.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't need to tell you, right? And so they're focusing heavily on that, and they're focusing heavily on that also in terms of training that next generation. And a classic example, one of the most brilliant ones I've ever heard was a young couple who were very successful, very, very wealthy, and they would sit their kids around the table, and the kids were at the age of time 5 and 3, and they put a bunch of money on the table, cash. The kids' eyes expanded like saucers going, this is really cool, what's this about? Who is this for us? And Mum and Dad said, no, we're going to give this to someone. Who are we going to give it to? And over the next, they did this every month, and over the next years, the kids got engaged in different charitable causes, different community needs, helped out. And Mum and Dad didn't just allow them to give money, they'd actually go and help out at those charities too and learn what made those charities effective in terms of community impact, community reach. And the interesting thing was they discovered when those kids clicked over into the young adulthood is they sat down with Mum and Dad and they got a bit angry. It's good for listeners to know this will happen if they try this sort of thing. And they said, Mum and Dad, you're tight. Mum and Dad said, what do you mean? Well, you're only given $100 a month away every month. We earn a lot more than that. We can give a lot more than that. You need to give a lot more than that. Mum and Dad said, you're right. $100 a month is not going to deal with all the starving kids down the road. It's not going to solve New Zealand's housing crisis. But what are you going to give?
Nice.
What are you going to give? Because we're continuing to give this, and you toed up what we've given over your whole lifetime year to date. It's tens of thousands, right? And we're going to continue to give because that's who we are as a family. What are you going to do? Oh, I could do this, and I could do this fundraiser, and I could try that. All good stuff. But we've got this area of a family business that you're flipping good at. If we raised that business by 10%, you can be giving away $1,000 a month. And the challenge that they had to their son was, if you're doing that and your charity woke up and said, right, every year at the beginning of the year, before we even start looking how we're going to resource our needs, we've got 12 grand committed. How's that going to impact them?
Yeah.
And so the kid, what's driving that kid to get involved in the family business? Is it, what's in it for me? Not really, is it?
No.
It's about how can I make a real impact in my life mission. And the other thing too, without realising it, is every month when that kid sat around the table with his parents and his siblings and argued for the case for what charity got what, governance. That kid's been involved in monthly governance since he was 5.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Don't tell me he's not darn good at business governance or charitable governance. Whatever he sets his hand to, he's had years of training in how to run business.
Do you think that the general public in New Zealand don't understand how much philanthropy is actually happening and how much high net worth individuals, wealthy people, rich people, whatever term they want to put on them, actually what I call it like self-tax themselves, and how much that's actually going on? That's
very fair. I know that in New Zealand there's north of $6 billion a year invested into the philanthropic sector, and it's done quietly. I'm using ultra high net worth as an example because the saying that they have in that space is money talks, wealth whispers. And so discretion is more important than promotion.
Why do they not want people to know that they're doing this?
Other than their family, I think it's because they're not wanting to influence philanthropy, because they're going, well, we're good at doing out what we are doing. So whether that's software, we're great at software business. We know what our business is. We're not going to dictate to the philanthropic sector how they do their job because they're better at it than we are. Yeah. We're there to resource it. Our job is to empower them and to get out of their way.
I think as well, like we've become obsessed with, if someone donates money to something, they're that type of person, you know? And so then you're almost like scared for people to know, I donated money to that. and because you might be, I think especially if it's a political, that's completely different. But it's fascinating. So some of those lessons that I just unpacked from what you're saying. So values, and there's no reason why we all can't be thinking about values.
100%.
And then what good we can do with our money.
Yep.
They're training the next generation. They're making it normal to have conversations about money.
Correct.
They're then learning about governance and decision making and what, there's so many different charities out there that once you do start donating to, you realise I can't do it all.
No, exactly, you can't. But if you contribute to what you're focused on and resonate with.
Yeah, and then you get to go on that journey yourself of, okay, what is important for me?
Yep.
And then I like that giving example too. We have a challenge with Keep the Change each year where basically the idea is that you've got to go out there and make, if you want to really do it, go and make $200.
Yep.
And then put $100 aside for yourself towards Christmas, and then give $100 to a complete stranger.
Nice. Love it.
And the messages that come in each year of people doing it, they get something out of it that they didn't see themselves. And a lot of people are doing it with their kids now, which is cool to see. But the point is cool. Yeah, the point being the first 100 is for Kiwi people to learn, I can make money another way. I actually know how to do this.
Yep.
And then giving, and then you never know what giving leads to for someone else, which I think is the powerful piece.
It's powerful. The impact of giving is something that I don't think we've really delved into sufficiently in this country, but it's huge.
Do you think, just changing tact a little bit, if all this money starts moving down through generations and people have a really bad relationship with money, or they believe rich people are arseholes, for instance, well, if you inherit a stack of money, what are you going to do? You're probably going to go, well, I don't want to be rich. I better, because now, are you an arsehole?
That's right.
You know what I mean? So
it's self-sabotaging, isn't it?
Yeah. I wonder how much of that could go on, and is that part of the sort of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves concept?
100% it is, because people just don't know how to be stewards with it and how to be prudent with it and how not to let it change who they are. And I think that's a big challenge, isn't it? They then just start blowing it. You see situations where kids inherit something, they just start buying things, and then they suddenly have all these so-called friends that are hanging on to them because they're getting free stuff out of it, and then it's gone, and then they're sitting there abandoned and lonely and broken. And you don't want that for your listeners, and I don't want it for them either.
No.
That's why you're so passionate about doing this, is get that literacy out there, understand how to deal with it. Yeah. And it starts small.
I think one thing I observe, and I'd be keen to get your thoughts on whether you see the same thing, but this is just a feeling, right? If I'm talking to a number of people, millennials are a little bit, they've got this like almost positive sense of paranoia of maybe the pension won't be there. Yeah. I can't rely on inheriting it from my parents because they might even just leave it all to charity. Yeah. I've just got to go out there and make it happen. I can't trust the government anymore. There's too much weird shit going on. Yeah. And they're almost like, I just need to build my own wealth and just fend for myself and my family for a bit to take some power back. Yeah. But what I wonder, given what you're saying before, is if we facilitate better conversations with our families about the wealth that they might have, then we can drop a little bit of that paranoia and go, you know what, actually, the folks are saying that they've got money to lend, they've got a fund set up that we didn't know about, and then all of a sudden, the stress might decrease. You can start thinking a bit more clearly about, given I know that now, what risk do I want to take? Who do I want to be? Correct. Where do we want to live? Correct. Yep. Is that fair?
It's absolutely fair. It informs a good, healthy conversation and good, healthy planning. I suppose an example is you see an economic shift and everybody panics. Yes. Well, not everybody. Some people sit there and go, hang on, there's a change here. Let's actually understand what it is, and let's start putting some plans in place and start looking for opportunity. And that's really what we're trying to encourage families to do by having these conversations, isn't it? Is to say, yes, there is change. We can't stop it. Time is marching on. Change will happen. This shift will happen. It's either going to happen by default, and we're going to deal with a mess, or we're going to have these conversations and start doing it in a way that's planned, that's managed, that ensures that what's been worked for previously is grown and used wisely. And as you say, that intermediate generation, that millennial, can stop panicking and start thinking, let's plan. Let's actually start engaging with mum and dad and with our kids and plan.
Yeah, I wonder if from like baby boomer to millennial, the whole thing will change a little bit, because I do think it's become more normal. Like I was sitting in the office yesterday having a chat with a lad doing some business planning, and everything we were talking about, I was thinking, I wonder if like baby boomers would have engaged an accountant to talk about these things. It would have just been like not the dumb thing to do. But young people are growing up learning about money, investing, etc., and it will be a lot more normal to have these conversations about money. But
I think so.
Yeah, even talking to mum about conversations with her parents, it was kind of some things you just don't ask. And even now, I think it's if you ask someone, "Oh, how much do you earn?" It's like, whoa.
Yeah. Why'd you ask me that?
Yeah.
Mind your business.
Yeah. So I
Except
do.
you being the accountant, it is your business.
Yeah.
I am.
This number needs to change.
That's right.
Most Kiwi don't have a financial plan, they have a she'll be right mate attitude. Amy from Leverage is helping KTC listeners change that. If you're needing direction, clarity, or wondering what your next financial move should be, then book a call with Amy or download her free DIY financial plan to freedom. To do that, visit financialplan.co.nz. Hey, the farming crew out there in the agri sector, some of them enjoy this pod. It'd be rude not to speak directly to farming, because I think it's a big sector of the country.
Yes.
And what I'm hearing is, well, I don't know if I can get into farming because A, I'm not interested, going back to some of those examples earlier, but B, how am I going to have the capital to potentially be able to do it? What are you seeing in that farming space?
Farming space is huge. And the interesting thing is that the farming space, because they've got such a unique set of challenges, some of which, of course, is they've got high asset value and very low cash flow, right, relative to their asset base. And also you've got this challenge of going, we've got one farm, 4 kids. How do we deal with it? And I think what we've found very helpful for them is to have these sorts of value conversations, to actually get the family having those sorts of chats and discussions, and then to say, right, well, if we separate the asset from the business of farming, so a good example would be dairy farming. You got the asset, which is the land, and you got the business, which is the herd, the shares, all that sort of stuff. Now you're dealing with, say, a $10 million farm and a $1 million or $2 million business. If we, instead of trying to sell that to one of the kids, if we put the land asset, this is just an example, right, into a stewardship type arrangement structure, we're not increasing our bank debt for the sake of a transition, right? Mum and dad are still secure. One of the kids can then afford to buy a $2 million business. That's a whole different proposition to a $12 million enterprise, right? They're sitting there going, do I really want to be debt up to my eyeballs for the rest of my living days funding my family? Probably not. But at that point then too, you can sit down going, there's a certain point that land asset is going to be capable of being leveraged. And let's talk to the other kids about what they want to do, and that's where you can leverage, start to use family banking as quite a good tool to help those farming families. That's not going to fit every farming family, but my point that we're trying to make and that you're trying to make is having these conversations earlier is really, really important, because it gives you more options in terms of how you can design that next step, right? Yeah. And by having the conversation earlier, it gives mum and dad better voice, but it also allows them to hear from and have the kids engaged, and that way you're setting expectations correctly. And one of the biggest and most tragic things that we've had to deal with in farming families is where there's a lack of that communication. You get all sorts of wrong expectations, and it's those wrong expectations that create family bust-ups. And whilst that's quite lucrative for the litigators in my field, it's not something I count as a success or a win when that happens. So if we can avoid that, I think it's better for the country and certainly better for the families too.
Yeah, I think it's something that when I was working in Hawera, it was talked about succession planning for farmers and whatnot, and it's almost like the tidal wave coming at that industry.
Huge. It's tragic because you see in general industry, I think you had a stat saying that the majority of owners are over age 50. Yeah. Well, in farming, it's even older than that. You're looking at sort of 70 is not an uncommon age for a farmer to be still owning the farm, still running the business, and sitting there going, I need to think about succession. You and I in the ages we are going, right, okay.
Yeah. I saw someone recently talking about how succession keeps getting delayed because oh, I better wait till after the pandemic. Oh, I better wait now till after the recession. Oh, now we've had that person leave, so we better wait until we've got that person replaced. And it seems what they were saying is there's always a reason every year to not start executing on it. Is that what you see out there?
Very much. It's, it'll cost me money.
Yeah.
Well, yes, it'll cost you money, but it'll cost you about 1/10 of what it's going to cost you if you don't start.
Yeah.
So we Kiwis are great at putting it off, because it's like you said earlier, it's just not in us to talk about what happens when I die. It's just not how we roll. But I think the important thing is it's a bit like, put a plug in again for the importance of wills, is once you've sat down and worked through it and signed it off, you can actually just put it out of your mind because you've dealt with it.
Yeah.
And I think succession's like that. Once you've had those sorts of less than pleasant conversations and you've actually got a roadmap, you don't have to stress about it anymore because you've got an idea what you're doing, regardless of what the economy does, regardless of what happens around the world. You've actually got a bit of a game plan now, and you can be focusing on that. And that creates something that's positive, that's forward-looking, that people can get around and engage with. And that's where you can start having those sorts of family meetings where you're going, hey, this is just us as a family. We've got our clarity, we've got our roadmap, and this is just us preserving our relationship.
Example that I've been using to help people think about this, where they might not be, wealthy or whatever yet, is that KiwiSaver effectively allows us to start thinking like this and start putting ourselves down the road. Because if you can get yourself financially sweet outside of your KiwiSaver,
yes,
then you've got this compounding piece of wealth.
Correct.
That's one part of your toolkit, let's say.
Yep.
And if you don't need it, then what are you going to do with it? And it could become your tool to allow some further donation in time for funding, family, much like the example you're talking about, granddad leaving it behind to help the grandkids, etc., right?
Correct, 100% it is. And isn't it often amazing as an advisor, we sit there with a client and they're going, oh, we don't have much. We've got our home. I say, oh, okay, have you got a life policy? Yep. What's that worth? $1 million.
Yeah.
And you see them go, oh.
Yeah.
So we're not just dealing with your $200,000 equity in your home anymore, are we? And you say, oh, no, you're right. And you're correct. KiwiSaver, that's a great tool in terms of families being able to help families.
Yeah. Here, in an article I was reading of yours, many inheritors won't receive wealth until they're in their 60s, well past their most financially stressful years. Unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, and that's to deal with where traditionally in New Zealand we're quite terrible at this whole succession thing. And so family hold on to it until they die. And so, particularly in the farming sector, you're dealing with transitions where mum and dad might be in their 70s or 80s and the kids are in their 60s. And by then the kids have had kids of their own and possibly even have grandkids of their own, and they're sitting there going, well, why are we sitting having this conversation? My life's sort of 3/4 of the way through.
Yeah.
And I think for the families in that situation, that's where this whole conversation around values becomes really important. Because then they can go, okay, well, we didn't have access to any of that resource while we were raising our kids, but now we've got grandkids. How do we as a family repurpose or repristinate our legacy to date and start being a bit more proactive?
And then potentially like doing some of that before you're getting to that age, etc.
Correct.
It all starts with facilitating those conversations.
100%. And it could be, like we're saying, using those family funds to actually help the grandkids get in. That's not putting everything that family have in one bucket, but it's creating a tool that can say, well, what do we learn from what we've had to deal with?
Yeah.
And to turn the negative into a positive in terms of moving forward.
A couple of things to wrap up, and one you might not want to dive into, but I'm going to ask you about a wealth tax in a second.
Yeah.
This economy that you're a part of and I am and that the listeners are at the moment, how tough has this been, given that you've been pretty close to the economy now for a number of decades, right?
It is very tough. I mean, it's harder than most people realised and a lot of the commentary was sort of, I guess, optimistic and hopeful. but it's one of the harder ones I've been in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we started our law firm right as the GFC launched, so I've been through that as well.
Oh wow. Yeah. And then you were and then prior to that, were you practicing through like the 90s at all?
Yes,
Like,
just came in at the end of the share market crash.
Oh wow.
That old.
Yeah. What a great time to learn. In
Oh,
the deep end.
exactly. Dropped in the deep end going, law firms, accounting firms, family businesses all shrunk significantly during that period, and yet there was also phenomenal growth for areas too. So
one or two, I'm a real like macro and high level type thinker. So when I see a government saying, oh, like grow, we're going to get out there or like we'll drop the official cash rate and everything will just be great again. I look at things and go, yeah, but the world's very different now. And so two of the things that I look at, I think, well, we've got an aging demographic. Yeah. Well, that's so one theme, right? But that's basically then, well, they've got a lot of the wealth. Then why are they all of a sudden going to go back out there and just be, buying things? Maybe they've got everything they need, and then they're, they're not fueling the economy as much as maybe we thought they were going to. And then secondly, if a lot of them are business owners, and we're saying, hey, we need you to. You've just gone through the meat grinder of the last 5 years.
That's right. Wipe the tears off.
And think about exporting, think about hiring, think about technology, think about, that's going to grow the economy. And I'd be going at 60-ish, like, excuse my language, but fuck, I don't know if I can be bothered.
Exactly. Why should I put myself through that pain? And I think that's where succession can be helpful in that space, because then they're not having to. Yeah. And they can step back and allow the next gen to actually take that risk. But the beauty on that is next gen aren't taking that risk in isolation, right? They're taking that risk with mum and dad's wisdom and learnings, right? They don't have to repeat the bumps and bruises that mum and dad have got through the school of hard knocks. They can learn from the principles of those and play it smart.
Well, and to counter my point as well, we're seeing record inquiry. Maybe it's because we're doing more marketing around it, but it seems like, even I've got mates I went to uni with reaching out, I haven't spoken to for years. They're like, hey mate, how do you go about buying a business?
Yes.
And there's this wave of people wanting to come in and buy into some of these baby boomer businesses, whether it's one they work at or even just buy one outright, because they've and the data basically shows that younger business owners do better.
Yes.
Yeah,
they do.
Yeah, which of course they would. Like, they're going to be more energy, take more risk, and go, like. So, I don't think it's any shade on those older business owners, but that's
But I think it does stress, though, the importance of proactive strategy around succession.
Yeah.
Because if they can take the reins now and do this by design, they're unlocking opportunities for the young ones coming through, whether it's loyal team members in terms of MBO, management buyout, or whether it's family members. Doesn't matter. They're unlocking opportunity there. But they're doing it in a way where those young ones coming through have got the ability to take hold of their energy and take hold of their opportunities, but they've got the wisdom of that previous generation still there, available on tap, going, I wouldn't do that because
we've tried that.
We've tried that. Here's how that worked out.
Yeah.
And my hope is, through what you're doing and what we're doing, is that we can encourage more of that, because it's that's going to help grow things.
Now, recently I read an article about, I don't know how many years it went back, but it was basically like, this politician suggests the capital gains tax. Then they've ruled it out. This one, a wealth tax, and then it's got binned. And it's like, we're back here again by the feel of it out there, where this next election is going to be one of those, right, should we, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
Do you think in your lifetime you'll see a form of wealth or capital gains tax?
I sincerely hope not, because in my experience and the research that I've done going back decades and generations, is it destroys families' resource.
Talk us through that.
So I'll give you a classic example. In New Zealand, we used to have death duties. So in the death duty scenario, a classic example from the Waikato would be a family-owned farm. So granddad dies, a big chunk of that has to now be paid across to the government. Well, the problem is that farmers own a lot of dirt, they don't own a lot of cash. So what's the result? You either got to borrow the hang out of your bank, and if a bank's going, well, why are we funding this? You're not funding growth, you don't have the cash flow for it, or you've got to sell the farm. How's that helping transition things from one generation to the next? It's disempowering. And every jurisdiction that you look at, whenever there's a wealth tax or a death duty, it always crushes it for the next generation. end up spending about the first 2/3 of their working life recouping what was lost.
Interesting.
So I dislike it. And the other thing, I was talking to a tax advisor recently, and he said they're quite supportive of the IRD's transition back into away from working at computers and actually engaging in business, because in their observation, there's about $13.6 billion of lost revenue per year in the current tax regime. It's just not being picked up.
Mm.
So do we want to start punishing family business with wealth taxes and capital gains taxes, or do we just focus first on tidying up what we've already got and the ability to draw in another $13.6 billion a year of income without actually changing the system? You know, we've got a relatively clean tax system as it is. Why are we going to keep making it more complicated?
Yeah.
You know, just my opinion.
No, at least you've got one. At least you're happy to voice it too. But it's funny. I was brushing my teeth thinking about that this morning because I was having a conversation.
Best ideas happen, right?
Yeah. What is wrong with us, eh? Yeah. But because I was thinking about the whole capital gains tax and this convo, and then I was thinking, I recently had a conversation with somebody in my profession. They were talking about a business owner that was hundreds of thousands of dollars behind on tax, and then had multiple rentals. And I was saying, oh, they need to sell the rentals to clear the tax. They're like, no, and I'm like, no, but the reason they have the rentals is because they haven't paid the tax. So they don't actually own the rentals.
Correct.
The taxpayer owns the rentals.
Owns the rentals.
So
I agree with that.
Give the rentals back and then pay the tax, and then
Correct.
we're square. And
Correct.
it was like, no, they shouldn't have to do that. I'm like, what? No, of course they should. I'm like, because
That's right.
You
They're
know,
stealing from someone.
yeah. But there are so many examples of that stuff where the IRD can't just get to everything. But we are seeing massive liquidations and whatnot where people are, they're funding their businesses on the taxpayer.
Correct.
Which arguably, but I think that a capital gains tax or a wealth tax is a shiny object for a lot of people to go, oh, great. My problems in my life will be solved
because the government will get to take it off someone else who's been more successful and rah. It is very much a shiny tool and a toy that people look at on a regular basis. And as I say, my research in it in multiple jurisdictions is it never achieves what people think it does. And to an extent, we've already got enough of a capital gains tax as it is. You know, if people are in the business of buying and selling and flipping property, well, then that's treated as income. That's a form of functional capital gains tax, and it's an appropriate one too, because they're selling an asset, liquidates money, there's cash available. Great.
I saw someone wealthy saying as well that there is a wealth tax because every time they go and buy personal items, they've got to pay 15% GST on it.
True.
And they're consumers of it. And then I had to ask ChatGPT, okay, how would you argue against that to try but tax just becomes so tricky once you do go down, and it
really does.
And I think we're always looking for this like fair system, but from what I've learned through my career is that doesn't really exist because and I think a good example of this is whenever during the budget, the government do the budget, they'll say, right, we're changing this and the threshold is this for working for families, for instance, and someone goes, oh, we earn $1 extra and we don't get it, but the next door neighbours do. That's so unfair. And just even accepting that whatever the settings are, it will never be fair because we determine.
Someone unhappy.
Yeah. Right, let's get off that. Hey, last thing, and I nearly forgot to ask this, but trusts.
Yes.
Are they what they used to be? Are they still, for the ordinary family that might not be high net worth, etc.? I get questions all the time of like, oh, we're going to set up a trust. And I'm like, oh, what for? Oh, I don't know. I saw it on TikTok that someone's got a trust in and there's all these benefits. But I almost feel like they've become a little bit less fashionable in New Zealand.
They're definitely less fashionable in New Zealand, but in my view, absolutely important.
Okay.
So trusts are really a form of insurance policy, and they're a tool for effective succession. So I heard the saying recently that trusts are not a magic trick, they're a discipline. And it's very much like we use the insurance example often. You know, when you take out insurance, you take it out during a blue sky event when you're not on risk. And you hope to heck that you never have to rely on it. But one thing you do with that insurance policy is you jolly well make sure it's current. Right, you've got the discipline of ensuring that the premiums are paid, that the policy's kept current, and it's in place. In the event that if something happens, there's nothing that's going to stop it from working. And that's very much the same thing with trusts. A big challenge with trusts in the 70s, 80s, and 90s is they were like a fashion accessory. You know, I've got new pink shoelaces. My sister would say, cool. And someone else would go, I've got to trust.
Yeah.
You know? And then they'd stick this thing in the drawer, ignore it, and then 20 years later wonder why it wasn't doing what it was promised.
So the high level for people out there to understand, the purpose of a trust effectively is to move the ownership of assets into a separate legal entity, i.e. a trust.
Arrangement, yep.
Yeah, and then Luke doesn't own them anymore. Luke's trust does.
That's
Luke
correct.
does something naughty or gets attacked by someone suing me, for instance.
Yep.
There's not too much to sue against me.
Because you don't own it, the trust owns
does.
it. That's correct. And it's the origin of it is back in the time of Richard the Lionheart, when they were a misogynist society, and to have any form of wealth, you had to be the eldest legitimate male. And of course, then they were off pillaging and plundering their way through Europe and so forth. And so the government of the day passed a law that said if you're not survived by your eldest legitimate male, then the deeds to your land are forfeit to the crown. And that's, I think, when we had this sensitive New Age guy movement arrive, right? Going, well, it's one thing for me to head off and do whatever the government wants me to do, but blimmin' heck, I'm not having my wife and daughters thrown on the street just because something happens to me. And so the concept was, how do we ring fence and protect those resources to protect and provide for family beyond just myself? You know, thinking again back to values beyond just me. You know, what do? I've got married. I've got in my case 4 kids. How do I make sure that they're protected if something happens to me? Why should they suffer if I do something stupid?
Yeah,
you know. And so that's the kind of the concept behind it.
I feel like we're going to get a number of questions off the back of this, and this will just become we might have to do a regular and angular.
We can do, man. It'll be
6
fun.
months.
It'll be fun.
Hey, AI in law.
Yes.
Are you worried about it? What's the industry saying?
AI in law is an interesting one. There's lots of sorts of takes on it. For me, it's a plus. You know, at least I can make sure that my syntax is correct, the tone is right.
Yeah.
Does it change that judgment of sitting down across like you and I are now and going, okay, you could got option A, B, and C. Which one would you pick? You know, AI will list 4 of them, but which one's actually going to really work? And it's that ability, that relationship that you have with your clients, for example, where you can go, look, on the face of it, that would work, but I don't recommend it because of X, Y, and Z. It's that ability to have that trusted advisor relationship. The day-to-day details of whether we've got Section 51 of the Trust Act covered off, AI can help with that. You know, that's not really the value that you give to your client. It's that relationship, that walking the journey with them, the understanding where they're trying to head, and being able to interpret and understand that area, but apply it in a way that makes it different for them. So I think AI is not going to be able to deal with that in the short term, but AI will definitely help in terms of administration, keeping current, making sure the tone's right, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was very lucky. I had a good boss when I was in Taranaki, and he would say, get off the fence. The client wants you to get off the fence and tell them what you think. Like,
correct, exactly. They want to hear what you actually do think, because that counts. That's why they're talking to you.
Yeah, and I think experience is only going to become more valuable where people are, people do like to bounce ideas and decision-making off other people. And the risk with so much information is that we become uncertain. I think that's what we're seeing out there now. You've gone from... You and I would have had to go to the library and read physical books to pass our exams to now, I might just quickly Google that, I'll get ChatGPT to do it.
Exactly.
But, you ask the wrong question, you get the wrong answer, and then 100%. All of a sudden you're, going in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
Hey, if people want to find you, so Grayson Clements, if they Google that, so that's graysonclements.co.nz, Andrew Clements, you should pop up.
That's the one.
Any other ways to get in touch?
So 07 857 0900 is our main office number. And we're based at Innovation Park at Waikato, and just off the motorway, easily accessible, and it's free parking. And there's even a cafe there that does decent coffee.
There we go. Great part of the country is the Tron, mate. We were talking about the Chiefs, but we'll
that's right. We'll leave that for another day.
Well, thank you for making the time and for coming up, mate. I think that's going to be fascinating. We've covered some serious ground at a high level. I do think it'll encourage, hopefully, people to think about some of these things in a bit more detail. And I think we'll have to do a round 2 at some stage. So look forward to staying in touch.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Luke. It's been great.